recognize some folks. We've got J.J. Banks, we've got Judy, we've got Michael Allen, who you all know, Jim the bartender, Sanjay Galante outside.
They're all here.
You like the bartender. Ramiro's here, Brandon Vooch. Colonel Krista Vooch is retired again. Round of applause, because this doesn't happen without their help. So, let me just thank Brigadier General Norris and his wife, Jane Connell, for accepting the invitation to come up here. I know he wouldn't be up here without you, Jane Connell, so thank you again. JMO, you can see by the crowd, they're very interested in what you have to say. I think the point is relevant. Well, a funny story about it, which, and again, thank you for coming up here, but I didn't want to tell them who all's in the crowd so much, because we also luckily have some of the older people up here in the front, at least from the men. The women are wonderful. The women are wonderful. The men, Don, you're not because you're 29 and you're doing great. But you know, the worst thing for a Brigadier General in the Marine Corps, especially running the recruit depot, is to come speak and not know who the crowd is, or find out in the crowd that you've got a bunch of retired lieutenant generals, major generals, and you got a bunch of basically great beers in the crowd who are going to ask some pretty hard questions. But I don't want to tell you that. I know you make them upstairs, but Jane, well, thank you for coming up and inviting us. We've got the old and the new. We've got midshipman from Berkeley.
All right.
I see you got a couple Marines. Stand up, Marines. You got some Marines here?
Wow.
That, folks, is what it's all about. Educate the memory and serve, and it's the new Marines, it's the young Marines, it's the families, it's the veterans, it's everybody. But that's the future right there. The midshipmen and the Marines. So thank you for attending, and this is going to be an absolutely incredible discussion. So really do appreciate it. And again, to my friends that are here, I know you're not going to give Jim, you're not going to roast JMO, but if you want to grab them afterwards, we've got former deputy commandants, we've got former F commanders, we've got former people from INL, infantry officers, logisticians, aviators. Ask the questions because I know everyone's very interested in what's going on in the Marine Corps today. So with that, I want to thank everybody. You're in the Crystal Lounge. For those of you who don't know, absolutely fantastic room. Look at the chandeliers, look at the room. It's a 100-year-old building. You couldn't build a place like this today. So you're in absolutely one of the most beautiful rooms in the hotel. We've been here for 100 years. The Marine Corps has been here since 1946. We are back after COVID. Thank you for the support. We need continued support as we recover from it. And thanks to speakers like General Morris, we're going to get there with your support. So on that, General Morris, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening. How are we doing? Good. Hey, it's wonderful to be here. And believe it or not, I am not an author. So I kept seeing on the advertisements, meet the author. And I was like, well, I haven't really written a book, but I appreciate it. I've written some things in proceedings, but not a book. But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here. To the graybeards that are here, General Rocco, Whistler, Davis. I'm not sure if General Davis made it yet. Still stuck in traffic. Dana and Clarity, Major General Hudson, to Barry Graham. Thank you for all being here. Mr. Kevin O'Brien. Where's Kevin O'Brien? Not here yet. And you're Don Reed, is that right, sir? Awesome. Okay, yeah, we got an empty seat marker there. To members of the board, Marines, family, and friends of Marines and our military, and as General Rocco said, some of our young midshipmen and Marines that are here carrying the legacy. Thanks for joining me here to open the 2023 lecture series. I hope this won't be a lecture, but I do want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Marine Corps these days, certainly on the recruiting and recruit training side, as well as some of the other initiatives that our Commandant has put forward over the last 3.5 years. So as advertised, my name is Jason Morris, and I am the Commanding General of Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego in the Western Recruiting Region. So I wear 3 hats, if you will, down there. I'm responsible for recruit training and recruiting west of the Mississippi River. and I'm also in charge of the installation of MCRD San Diego and really interacting with the Southern California community, both the city of San Diego and the county of San Diego, and also our elected members of Congress, our state assembly members and city council members down there. So it's a full-time job, but thrilled to be up here with you. And I do want to say a special thanks to General Rocco and Susan for inviting us up here. They were our next door neighbors in Quantico. His last year in the Marine Corps and our first year as general officer and spouse. But it's great to see you again, and again, I'm really glad we could make this happen, certainly while I still have a job down in San Diego. To Barry and Juliana, thanks again. It was great to have you down with the Benedettis at the depot a few months ago, and to all the board of directors of the association and foundation, thanks for fulfilling your mission to honor the legacy of military service by commemorating, educating, and serving our military, its veterans, and local community in the Bay Area, which has been a legacy kept for 76 years. And for the memory of those who have given their last full measure to our nation, so that we never forget them, and we must never forget. And this memorial, this living memorial here, is a testament to that promise that we have all made. So thanks for doing that. This is an important mission for all of us. So it really truly is an honor to be here to speak to you tonight at this hotel in America's original gateway to the Pacific. And as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about Marine Corps recruit training first, then I'm going to go into probably a more challenging subject, recruiting, and then a brief summary of the Commandant's 3 initiatives over the last 3.5 years, which were generated from his 2019 Commandant's Planning Guidance. And I suspect you're going to have some questions to the graybeards. I know, you're primed and ready to go.
They are literally graybeards. How about that?
So they are. So I hope to be able to answer some questions and not just talk this evening. But before I dive into those topics, I thought I might lighten the atmosphere and offer a few lessons that I have learned in just 4 short years as a Brigadier General in the Marine Corps that might be illuminating for those that haven't had this experience. So these are things that one really doesn't think about at all until you get the call that you were selected and congratulated and offered condolences at the same time. So first, stay humble. General Amos, one of our former commandants, is well known for putting little yellow school buses on the desks of the new brigadiers at our flag finishing course. It was Brigadier General Select Orientation course. And he liked to remind those new flag officers to stay humble and to listen more than you talk. He stated unequivocally that if he took a new crop of brigadier generals on a field trip, put them on a school bus, and the bus went off a bridge, killing all of them, that he could find another bus, or 2, maybe even 3, of equally qualified colonels to take our places tomorrow. He said that at about the 3rd bus, he might see a decrease in quality. Nice to know. So listen to what your Marines have to say, learn what you don't know, and don't get too big for your britches. Next, we've got to stay fit. There are no fat Marine generals. We are told, so watch what you eat, watch what you drink, and PT. We must set the example in everything that we do, and our actions must be above reproach. Third, be prepared to speak to everyone and anyone about anything going on in the Marine Corps. And that may be a surprise to you. It was to me in my first week on the job. So my first command as a flag officer was training command, which is under training and education command, and it's responsible for all of our MOS producing schoolhouses. So I was down at MATSIG 21, the Marine Aviation Training Support Group, 2021 headquarters, getting a command brief. Like I said, it was my first week on the job. And the commander there, Hojo, I don't know if you know Hojo, Johnson, he said, "Hey sir, would you mind speaking to the lieutenants?" I said, "Sure, why not? Let's go talk to them." And I expected a couple of dozen lieutenants, and I would just go into a ready room and just start talking to them, answering questions. So we walk down this hallway, and we get into this big hangar, and there are about 400 individuals standing at parade rest. And as Hojo and I were walking down the center aisle, I looked at him and I'm like, "Hey Hojo, who are these guys waiting on?" "You, sir." Okay. Well, as I'm walking, I'm thinking, well, I better figure out what I'm going to say. Very different from when I was the MEFG3 as a colonel, when nobody outside my division, my staff section, really cared what I had to say. And fortunately, I had read the Commandant's Planning Guidance twice since General Berger had published it, so I stuck to my guns and just talked briefly about that. But I got all sorts of questions. One lieutenant student naval aviator, who was obviously a student of aviation and air-to-air combat, raised his hand and said, "Sir, what can you tell me about how to best defend your aircraft against SA-16s when you're doing close air support?" I said, "I'm a grunt. I have no idea. Ask some of your pilot instructors." So anyway, that was a lesson. And lastly, you serve at the pleasure of the Commandant and are playing with house money. This is what our current Assistant Commandant calls it. And if the Commandant has a job for you, then you continue to serve. If not, then he'll thank you for your service, tell you good luck, and you go home. So tonight, I'm going to try and stay humble. I'm going to not overeat and drink. I'm going to provide you with some information and perhaps grist for the mill with my comments, and hopefully keep my job. Okay, so recruit training. I'm going to start with my background in recruiting and recruit training, and then provide an update on what we're doing at MCRD San Diego. So I've done 2 previous recruiting tours before this tour. Do I have anybody in here that has done recruiting duty on the Marine side? Not a hand. Okay.
That speaks volumes.
So, yes, it does. I will be glad to delve into more details if you have questions, but I'll try and cover this briefly. So I was a recruiting station commander in Portland, Oregon from 2003 to 2006, about 2 months after I got out of Baghdad and Diwania with an infantry battalion after the march up. And then as a district commander, I was remediating as a colonel in the Midwest. So I took command of 9th Marine Corps District, and I established the headquarters at Naval Station Great Lakes on the North Shore of Chicago. And I had only been in Chicago to change planes before that, so we did not know a soul. And I learned very quickly that winter that Midwest winters are very different from where I grew up in New England. And I'm now about 19 months into my 3rd recruiting tour. So I've got almost 8 years total in the business. So I'd love to answer questions if you got them after this. So life at MCRD San Diego remains awesome. Life down there in San Diego is good. And in fact, on the 1st of December 2021, the depot celebrated our 100th year of operations. Due to the COVID Omicron outbreak, we delayed the centennial commemoration in San Diego until the 5th of March last year, but we did manage to get the Marine Barracks Washington Battle Colors Detachment out to come help us celebrate the occasion. And another future milestone is going to occur this summer on the 2nd of August, 2023, when we will celebrate 100 years since we started recruit training in San Diego. And around 100 years ago, maybe a few years before that, the Marine Corps decided to move training from Treasure Island, right here in the Bay, which it had been for decades, down to San Diego. I'm told that the proximity to Latin America at the time, this was at a time before we started doing fairly significant campaigns in Haiti, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, but the Pacific as well. And I think the good weather down there also had something to do with it. But that decision was made, and we'll celebrate this summer 100 years of recruit training. And recruit training for Marines remains the most physically, mentally, and morally demanding recruit training in the U.S. military. It's 13 weeks of immersive and rigorous training that culminates in an event called the Crucible, and the complete transformation of a civilian into a United States Marine. The Crucible remains a 54-hour field exercise that Commandant Krulak, the Junior, implemented in 1997, and consists of a series of continuously executed physically demanding events over about 46 kilometers of Camp Pendleton hilly terrain with very little sleep and 1 meal a day. It remains a test of willpower and endurance for young Marine recruits. And at the end of the Crucible, the recruits who make it to the top of that hill that we call the Reaper, because it does reap a few recruits along the way, they earn their Eagle, Globe, and Anchor and the coveted title United States Marine. So every year the depot receives almost 18,000 Marine recruits from the recruiting force, a little over 50% of the Corps' mission, and makes about 88 to 90% of them into Marines. About 10 to 12% just don't make it. They don't have the stuff to be Marines, even if they want to be one. And then they go back home. And when a prospective Marine comes to the depot, they experience the toughest recruit training possible and are inculcated with our core values of honor, courage, and commitment, and a discipline, toughness, and bias for action that creates the indomitable expeditionary fighting spirit that Marines are known for. And our core values, as I said, of honor, courage, and commitment are stamped onto their hearts, and we sear into their souls 5 Marine Corps attributes: exemplary character, physical and mental toughness, being a warfighter, being able to decide, act, and communicate, and also leadership. And throughout the cycle, they are increasingly given more and more leadership opportunities to develop the confidence to accomplish any assigned mission. And after graduation, they progress through the schools of infantry and their MOS schoolhouses, some of which are as short as 3 months for truck drivers or supply administrators. Others are as long as 18 months for crypto-linguists or cyber space operators. And some, our pilots, go through even longer schoolhouses. Right now, about 3.5 years to be a rotary wing or tilt rotor pilot, and almost 5 years to be an F-35 pilot. So those young Marines continue to develop their leadership and technical skills until they're ready to join the Fleet Marine Forces dispersed across the globe. And they, you might ask, are they as good as the Marines in the past? Well, these young Marines are the ones who stood outside the wire at the Hamid Karzai International Airport in August of 2021 while we withdrew our forces. And young Marines, led by a staff sergeant, made the conscious decision to keep that gate open a little bit longer so a few hundred more Americans and Afghan partners could get through the gates and be saved. It ended up costing 11 of them their lives, along with a faithful corpsman and a soldier. But with their sacrifice, as I said, they saved several hundred more. And those same Marines served with me in staying in Afghanistan over a dozen years ago, and served with me during the march up to Baghdad. In a couple of months, it'll be 20 years since we did that. And I promise you, they remain as good as they ever were. A good news story and a testament to the professionalism and adaptability of Marines is that Marine Corps recruit training was not interrupted over the last 3 years despite the challenges of the COVID pandemic and the national lockdown. In fact, General Mortar tells a story about talking to the Secretary of Defense, and during March of 2020, when the country looked like it was shutting down, he was asked, should we shut down recruit training? Should we stop shipping people because of the pandemic? And General Berger was the only one of the service chiefs that said, no, we've got to keep moving recruits to the depots because they are the lifeblood of the Marine Corps. And these challenging environments is what Marines live for. So we don't stop training. He was the only one that said we should keep training. So we feel really good about that. And that first year of the pandemic saw us reduce some numbers in order to comply with CDC protocols and lodge them in hotels for 2 weeks before they actually came aboard the depot. We were hoping that they would get rid of whatever funk they were bringing from all over the country, and that seemed to work. So for over a year, we put recruits in the hotels down outside of San Diego, and they did the same thing at Parris Island to make sure that they could train safely and with confidence that we weren't going to spread COVID around the squad base. And that worked for us. I do want to highlight tonight as well that at MCRD San Diego, we are now training female Marines. That is a change which changes decades of policy and practice where all Marine females were trained at Parris Island. And in the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress directed the Commandant to integrate recruit training on both coasts and to do it by the start of 2028. First at Parris Island and then in San Diego. I will tell you, we have already confirmed what some of you may have already suspected, that integrating recruit training is the right thing to do for all Marines. I honestly don't know why it took us so long and why Congress had to tell us to do it, but it did. So male and female recruits now see the beginning of recruit training, how every Marine receives the same training in the recruit training regiment. There you go. Yes, ma'am. So you might ask, why has it taken us so long?
Yes, we will.
And
Yes.
she does. Well, due to congressional requirements to separate the sexes in the squad bays, because you don't really want to put 17 to 24-year-old young men and women sleeping together in those squad bays, and Congress recognizes that and put it in the law that we can't do it. And our immersive platoon open bay training environment, we have same-sex or same-gender platoons trained by same-sex drill instructors. And our critical shortfall and limiting factor remains our numbers of female drill instructors, which, as I said again, have previously only served at 4th Recruit Training Battalion at Parris Island, South Carolina. And with only 10% of the Marine Corps being females right now, there have just not been enough female non-commissioned officers and staff non-commissioned officers to fill the special duty assignments of recruiting, recruit training, and Marine Corps security guard duty. So we are making more. Since Parris Island already had female drill instructors and the 4th Battalion structure, it was tasked to integrate first. And Congress recognized that we would have to grow our own cadre of DIs and gave us until the end of calendar year 2027 to complete our integration. And by that time, we were confident that we would not only have the right number of DIs, but we could create enough experienced drill instructors to maintain the highest standards of training excellence and be self-sufficient. So the Commandant approved a plan for us to move forward. We ran a pilot early in 2021, and that was, as you would imagine, successful. The platoon that graduated was actually the honor platoon for that company. The female platoon was. So last year we trained 3 integrated companies and about 180 females. This year, we're going to train 12 integrated companies and almost 800 female Marines. Next year, we're going to double it to almost 1,500 females and 24 companies. And by FY25, we will be training about 30 integrated companies, about 75% of the units, and over half of the Marine Corps females, between 1,800 and 2,000 female Marines. And this is a good deal for us. Everybody's excited about it, and we're making it happen. So every company will not necessarily have female senior drill instructors and drill instructors in it, but it will have female chief drill instructors, first sergeants, company grade officer, and there will be female representation in every company. The companies with female platoons in them will actually have a drill instructor staff of females at the platoon level. So by the end of 2026, we will have accomplished our congressional mandate despite not being given any additional resources to do it. It's one of the things the Commandant told me to do is every time an elected official came in to make sure that they knew that you told us to do something and you didn't give us any extra money to do it. So I've been doing that. We will also have spent several $1 million to refurbish and build the facilities we require to optimize our gender integrated training infrastructure. Specifically, we are expanding our clothing issue facility. You can imagine females have some different uniform items. They have to be stored separately, tailoring has to be done separately. So we haven't had a separate facility to do that, so we will. We're going to construct new female heads in the training areas, frost the barracks windows, and ensure we have the right procedures in place to make sure that training is conducted both safely and with the health of the recruits in mind. And we've been working closely with the service and Congress to get those funds appropriated so we can build those same facilities, to make sure that our female recruits get the same equal experience at recruit training. Now you might ask, what does equal experience mean? I'll give you an example of this. So, training area heads, some of you may remember them, are designed to be maximally efficient. For males, it means that there might be a couple of stalls where you can sit down, and the rest of it is a trough along the bulkhead, the wall. Needless to say, there's a different experience for a platoon of 90 females going through there than there is 90 males. And when you're only given 15 minutes between training events, it slows things down. We're going to fix that. And so we've got an interim solution with a bunch of porta potties. You know, you're not really going to the field these days in the Marine Corps unless you see a porta potty somewhere. But we're doing that just in the interim to make sure that they have the capacity to meet our training schedule requirements. So I'm pleased to report that gender integrated training is going well, and then in a few years that phrase gender integrated will be no more. We're just going to make Marines in San Diego. As an aside, I was reading Brew Krulak's First to Fight some months ago, and I found a great story. And I thought, you know, whether you went to San Diego or Paris Island, you would enjoy this. So you might ask, are there still differences between the Marines who are made in San Diego, affectionately known as Hollywood Marines, and Paris Island? Well, I'll tell you what Brew Krulak had to say. So when he was my predecessor at MCRD San Diego, he went to Paris Island to find out what the differences were between how Marines were made at Paris Island and San Diego. And in the end, he and his staff concluded that there was only one difference, and I'm quoting from First to Fight. At San Diego, they taught recruits when jumping off a sinking ship to hold their nose. At Paris Island, they teach them to hold their privates. So the only way to know for sure where a Marine was trained is to wait until he jumps off a sinking ship. So in this particular area, I would tell you we're now aligned, and we continue to ensure that we're mirror imaging both depot POIs as much as possible. So that concludes my comments on recruit training. We're still making Marines. And I'm going to provide you next with an update on recruiting and the current challenges to the viability of the all-volunteer force. And I'll give you the bottom line up front with full transparency. As I mentioned earlier, I have almost 8 years in the business under my belt and have experienced 3 distinct periods of the recruiting environment over the last 20 years. So I mentioned to you that I came right out of Iraq in 2003, and within a couple months, Jane Connell and I were living in Portland, Oregon, where we knew no one, and were charged with recruiting. And for the first, I'd say, 6 months to a year, recruiters were still really living off of a lot of patriotic fever from post 9/11 and from the excitement that one typically generates when you know you're deploying and going into harm's way. Well, after about a year after that deployment, when the insurgency really took hold in Iraq, and many casualties came back, both killed and wounded, that patriotic fervor seemed to fade away. And in the Pacific Northwest, where there really is no military presence outside of Bremerton and the Navy up in Seattle, that was a tough environment to recruit out of. We worked hard, but we made mission during that time. I left right before the surge in the 2007-2008 timeframe. The next time I went back on recruiting was in 2014, and again I said I was up in Chicago area recruiting in the Midwest, and due to some outstanding efforts for the recruiting force before that, we were doing so well that we were actually ahead of mission from 2014 to 2017. And life was pretty good. We could really be selective about who we were bringing down to the depots and who we were bringing into the officer program, because there was, again, a great deal of desire to serve. When I came back to recruiting in 2021, this was really about a year after the COVID pandemic, and for the most part, much of the United States was still closed for business, although we were working our way out of it. So those 3 distinct periods, I experienced differences in the recruiting environment. So at the end of fiscal year 22, so at the end of September last year, the Marine Corps made its accessions missions in the officer, enlisted, and prior service categories, although we did rely on increased retention to cover a small shortfall in the non-prior service enlistments. More troubling, perhaps, was the fact that we dropped about 22% of our fiscal year 23 start pool. So I'm going to have to explain this to you, because there's a whole different language of recruiting duty. Every year you get a mission. Say it's 17,000 shippers that have to go to recruit training. You know generally when those individuals are going to have to ship out, and each week that there is a recruiting mission, there is a little name tag that is blank until the recruiter finds somebody that wants to ship, and then their name goes on that name tag, and it's moved to the week that they are going to ship out. The recruiting command wants to have about 53% of the next year's mission filled before the end of the previous fiscal year. So ideally, we go in with 53% of our start pool filled. This year, we came in with 30%. Now, what's the impact of that? That means that recruiters are trying to find people that need to be down at recruit training in 60 days or 30 days. We have shipped dozens of recruits to recruit training over the last 6 months who did not know their recruiter a month before they landed on the yellow footprints. So that leads to challenges for the recruiting force when they are trying to find people in the winter months where it is more difficult to find people to ship, And that gives us some lead time to make sure that we have poolees, those who have signed up but not shipped to recruit training, time to prepare for boot camp to give them the best opportunity physically and mentally to graduate. So needless to say, hopefully that explanation made sense. We made mission, but it came at a cost. And we have sustained our focus on the intangibles of service and earning the title Marine, but as a comparison, the other services had some challenges too. The Navy made their reduced enlisted mission, but not its officer mission. The Air Force struggled. And I mean, Air Force recruiters actually had to show up at the office and check their answering machines. That's what I mean by struggle. But ultimately, they made their mission. More concerning altogether, though, is the fact that the U.S. Army missed by somewhere between 15 to 20,000 recruits, despite record financial bonuses that they were offered for enlisting and shipping in the next month. They offered a $50,000 bonus to sign up and a $35,000 bonus on top of that if they were going to ship that month. 85,000, yeah. Sorry, age waiver, you're not going to qualify. I won't even sign that shit. So the challenge we've got is we have an environment that really hasn't changed all that much this year. Now there may be a recession coming, maybe on the horizon, we don't know. That may help us. Nobody wants that, but for the recruiting force, typically that may help us out a little bit. But especially the Army missing its mission by a division's worth of soldiers is not good for the country, and it's not good for our national security. And since the end of the last fiscal year, both the Navy and the Army have lowered standards. So they are writing what we call Category 4 recruits now, or applicants, which means for the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which is generally a 1, which is, you just put your name on there and that might get you 1 if you get nothing else right. And a 99, which is you get everything right, there's a sliding mean over time. They are taking people that are scoring less than 30. In fact, they are writing some people that are barely in the double digits, which again, for them to sign up in a complex world with a lot of high technology and serious challenges, it's not good having extremely either untrainable or unintelligent people in the ranks. So I'm going to go back about 50 years in time to provide some historical context. The last of America's military draft ended in 1973. That was part of President Nixon's strategy on Vietnamization and the drawdown of U.S. military forces from South Vietnam. I think many of you lived during this period or experienced this. Extremely politically divisive and tenuous that draft was. During the most unpopular war, it was deemed unnecessary in 1973. So with the end of that draft came the advent of the all-volunteer force, a requirement that the U.S. military was wholly unprepared at the time to execute, but would have to figure out. The advantages of that all-volunteer force were many. Service members who volunteered would be motivated to serve, therefore of higher quality, and require less training and supervision. They would enable the move to a more professional officer and NCO corps, and ultimately enable a merit-based system based on the up-or-out retention policy. The disadvantages of the all-volunteer force were few but high risk. Service members would have to be found and sold on joining, which was a major change for the services. They would have to be given a competitive wage to stay in the ranks and would require an organization and a process to bring them into the services. The decision to end the draft and replace military recruitment with a volunteer system had dramatic and enormous consequences on the quality of the military through the 1970s. And as an example, the Marine Corps missed its recruiting mission in 1975 by over 5,000 recruits because it just wasn't prepared to recruit them. And it threw quality out the window. Only 50% of the ranks were high school graduates. They were physically pathetic. And a high number of felonies were felons who were offered jail or the military. Quality suffered, and you can imagine that performance logically declined. And if you can believe this, the Commandant at the time actually testified in front of Congress that we needed to decrease the quality of the Marines that we were required to bring in because we just could not make our mission. He was told no by Congress. So imagine that today. Hard to believe for a force now that has largely been 99% high school graduates and some college graduates on the enlisted side for decades. And there were significant good order and discipline issues as well in the 70s. Some of you may have lived this again. There were gang battles and race riots on bases and installations. And in 1975, over 18,000 Marines deserted. The entire equivalent of a Marine division. And the other services had significant challenges as well. Now, fortunately for the Marine Corps, it had in its ranks a few visionary and combat experienced leaders who were determined to build back the Corps to high standards, one Marine and one discharge at a time. They created what's now called systematic recruiting and a willingness to discharge problem children. That was General Lou Wilson and General Bob Barrow. And the Corps cleaned house and started delegating separation authority to the 05 level, battalion and squadron commanders, and they could literally sign the paperwork, discharge an individual, have them pack their bags and drop them at the front gate and say, good luck to you. They did that thousands of times. Brigadier General A.J. McMillan, a former district CO, captured the best practices and installed this thing called systematic recruiting across the enterprise. And the Corps began to make its mission, and quality improved over time until by the end of the 90s, when the Corps' ranks were about 99% high school grads, like I said, and over 63% scored in the top half of the ASVAB scoring. So due to those efforts and decisions made by Generals Wilson and Barrow, a very different Marine Corps emerged at the end of the Reagan defense buildup. As the Corps rebuilt, General Al Gray found fertile ground with his warfighting concept of maneuver warfare. Professionalism and morale improved dramatically, and the United States military performance in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm resulted in a very lopsided victory that I didn't participate in, but my 1st Battalion commander described it as the great drive-by shooting and the validation of the all-volunteer force. Commandants Mundy and Krulak would continue to build on their predecessors' accomplishments and stood up the recruiting command in 1994. And then General Krulak, as I said earlier, reestablished or re-energized recruit training with the Crucible. And we continue to improve, generate increased combat readiness, and in 2003, when we deployed to Kuwait during Operation Iraqi Freedom, we demolished the Iraqi army in a matter of weeks. The military then had to reinvent itself mid-campaign into a counterinsurgency force that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan for the next 15 years. Again, only a quality, smart, motivated force could do that on the fly and be as good as we were, despite its challenges. One of the side effects of the all-volunteer force, however, was that the military became the 1% of the U.S. population that actually served in the armed forces and became more and more isolated from the American people. This socio-cultural separation was exacerbated by the Base Reduction and Closure Act, which closed many of the bases, military posts, and installations in the center of America. Now, the vast majority of military installations are in 12 states, and most of the American people never have any contact with the U.S. military. And that's caused the military to rely more and more on both military brats, on the blood, sweat, and tears of the recruiting force, and also those who would benefit by opportunities to serve. Many times those in the lower socioeconomic classes. Because most of America, at least recently, has not seen the military as part of their day-to-day lives or the path of choice. And in the minds of much of America, to include many of our academics and our school counselors, serving in the military is something that other Americans did, or it's an act of last resort, especially when the economy boomed. So despite a short uptick in patriotic fervor after 9/11, the all-volunteer force has commonly struggled to recruit the required numbers of service members and has occasionally missed mission at the end of the fiscal year. The Marine Corps, on the other hand, fortunately, due to some exceptional institutional branding and sustained marketing and advertising efforts, has done well, but last missed mission in 2005. That was at the height of the Iraqi insurgency, when we were focused on deploying combat forces and supporting our men and women in harm's way, like we should have, but we cut money from advertising and from marketing, and we also cut people from the recruiting force. We suffered because of that, and as I said, 2005 missed our mission. Belatedly, but we increased advertising, and we resourced MCRIC appropriately, adding 600 more recruiters to meet the 202,000 growth requirement for the Iraqi surge in Afghanistan, or in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And we continue to ride that wave of good resourcing and effort until this past year. I would say, however, that in 2020, unbeknownst to almost anyone at the time, there were storm clouds and headwinds brewing on the recruiting front even before the COVID pandemic descended upon us. So every year, the Office of Secretary of Defense sponsors a program called the Joint Advertising and Marketing Research and Studies, also known as JAMRS. That report showed a decline in the recruitable population between Generation Z and Millennials of almost 7 million Americans in this specific age group. So that smaller population also showed a sharp decline in qualified applicants, down from 29 to 23%. So right now, only 23% of the American population aged 17 to 24 qualifies to join the military. 23%. That's the result of increased obesity rates, medical diagnoses for things like ADHD and other problems, police records, and drug use. That decline, coupled in the same population with a decrease in propensity to serve from 9% to 7%, and for females it's only 3 to 4%, resulted in a perfect storm from near simultaneous events. The COVID vaccine mandate, which, however you stand on that issue, it has been a challenge for the population. The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the impacts of the current divisive political climate, the perception of senior military leaders becoming increasingly politicized, a lack of incentive to work because of government COVID checks, and let alone people that don't want to volunteer for a life change because they can earn $22 an hour at In-N-Out and sleep in their parents' bedrooms. Or their basements, probably not their bedrooms. And there is a growing lack of understanding of military service and the value proposition of serving. And finally, the constant drumbeat by the media and by some politicians of the broken veteran and a culture of pervasive sexual assault, both of which are objectively false. So those COVID pandemic lockdowns prevented recruiters from gaining access to high schools and businesses where they do much of their canvassing for the better part of 2 years. So recruiters were living off previous year business and doing about 98% of their business via cold calls and social media. And almost 2/3 worth of students had never seen a recruiter, let alone seen anybody in the military. And COVID lockdowns and virtual learning also negatively impacted high school learning. And our ASVAB scores have dropped by about 10%. Hopefully now that kids are back in school, that will start going up, but right now it's tough. And last March, despite all of these challenges, the Office of the Secretary of Defense decided that they would try to reduce non-EAS attrition, which was costing the government, DOD, billions of dollars a year. And what I mean by that is reducing the numbers of individuals that would not reach the end of their obligated service contract. That's non-EAS, non-end of active service attrition. So they implemented the medical health system Genesis. You may have heard about this, but it is essentially a DHA-run system that creates electronic medical records for incoming service members and draws from their electronic records growing up all their doctor's reports. Anytime somebody puts something in the medical electronic system, it pulls all that. So ideally that's designed to make us more efficient, but in fact it has made us far less efficient, to the tune of 15 to 20%. Not 15 to 20 people, 15 to 20%. Now we're getting better, but still it's caused challenges, and it's really exacerbated our challenges at the most challenging recruiting time in the last 40 years. So the all-volunteer force is a misnomer. It's the all-recruited force. And where do we find young men and women who want to serve their nation? Fortunately, across America, we still recruit in every zip code. And recruiting these days remains a challenging mission, and perhaps even more so. And so despite all these headwinds, I've got about 1,700 recruiters spread across the western part of the United States and the Pacific. They have a harder time finding qualified people, selling them on being Marines, and then getting them through this electronic medical system. Fortunately, we're making shipping, but 2023 promises to be just as challenging. So Walt Boomer, a retired ACMAC and four-star, who was a former district commander, said, quote, "Recruiting is where it all begins, in the schools and on the streets of our nation. We have proved time and again that our recruit training, good as it is, cannot turn unintelligent, poorly motivated physical wrecks into Marines. Recruiting high-quality candidates for the Corps is terribly expensive, but the price of not doing it is a disaster." So it's a no-fail mission for us. Right now it is an existential mission, and the Commandant has directed all of our senior leaders to support the recruiting force in a way that I have not seen in my on and off 20 years of recruiting, which is good for us, but it's tough on everybody, especially our recruiters. So that's the end of my recruit training and recruiting update, and I'll try and wrap up or blow through this Force Design, Talent Management, and Training Education Command update so I can get to some questions. First, the Commandant's Force Design Memo. That was his #1 priority from his 2019 Commandant's Plan Guidance, and it was designed to get after the problem that actually General Neller had identified, that the Marine Corps was not organized, trained, and equipped to fight a peer adversary in the in the priority theater of the Pacific. He tasked the Marine Corps divesting from legacy capabilities and investing in more lethal and relevant ones that would be fielded by the end of the decade. And I won't go through all the details that may come out in the questions, but it envisions a smaller, more mobile, and more lethal littoral maritime oriented force that would operate in a distributed maritime campaign and support the U.S. Navy in conducting sea control and sea denial operations. And that implementation is ongoing. We've had the better part of 2 years of wargaming and experimentation, and we are continuing to iterate on what right looks like for the future. So we've added back in some artillery cannon batteries. We've added in some more rotary wing and tilt rotor squadrons, and we are very much focused on making sure that we're aligned with the Navy to ensure that we get the right number of amphibious shipping, to include the new replacement for the light amphibious warship, now called the landing ship medium. So in parallel with force design, the Commandant also realized that without a change in the way we did manpower, that we would have a really, really hard time meeting our requirements for force design. So 75 years of industrial age manpower management is what he is trying to change. And that is something that really no one before him has wanted to touch. It's just been something that was almost too hard to do. So he has given guidance that we are going to do some things, and I'll list them off quickly, that are really a change to the way that we have done business in the past. Perhaps not completely, but certainly aspirationally. The first, Marines are individuals, not inventory. 2, talents can be identified and evaluated. 3, talents can be developed. 4, match talents to duties and you maximize performance. Incentives power the system. There is always a boat space for talent, meaning we're not going to get rid of people that we just don't have room in their MOS, but they can still contribute to the Marine Corps. And finally, that data drives decision making. So we've got a long way to go with this. We're still moving through it. Some ideas, like lateral entry, I know gained a lot of attention. This was a concept that somebody was just going to be able to come in as a staff sergeant or as a major without going through boot camp or OCS. The Commandant's clarified that, but we're still looking at ways to do it. The bottom line is, if you want to be a Marine, you still got to go through a recruit depot or OCS. And just this month, many of you may not have even seen it yet, the Commandant released his 3rd priority effort, which is Training and Education 2030. And that reinforces our understanding that the Corps' ultimate advantage is our human capital, our Marines, who must be trained and educated. So he did a number of things which I think are critical, because the battlefield of today and in the future is going to be different from the battlefield that we fought in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and longer. You have peer adversaries that can now track what we're doing before we leave the continental United States. We have movement that we have to conduct in theater, where we are under observation and potentially fires, long-range fires, throughout the time of our deployment period and our reception, staging, onward movement, and integration period. We can be sensed both from space, in cyberspace, and also in the electromagnetic spectrum, with a very dense and increasing denser ISR network that is both in space and also in the air. So we've got to do more with the Marines that we have, and we've got to outsmart the enemy and be faster with them. So Training Education Command primarily made some changes. It broke out Training Education Command into a 3-star command, out from under the old Marine Corps Combat Development Command and Combat Development and Integration, and ensures that that commanding general has a seat at the table when they're fighting for resources to invest in training education, which is different from before. It's been somewhere where honestly we have accepted risk in the past. So imagine what many of us have done in the past. One instructor, a large classroom of 250 or 300 students being lectured and reading off a chalkboard, or maybe spicing it up with some PowerPoint slides. We've all suffered through that. I spared you PowerPoint slides tonight.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I didn't want to have to do that or subject you to it. But the days of rote memorization, paper handouts, and Scantron fill-in-the-bubble tests, we're putting that behind us. I'm happy to say that we're moving towards adult-based learning. And while recruit training isn't going to change much, because we still have to transform civilians into Marines, we are working to implement a modernized learning environment with digitized content available so education can happen asynchronously, meaning virtually at any time in an individual's either career, whether they're on active duty in the reserves, and they can access that, and it can be something that is more substantial and accessible. So we're doing that both at the schoolhouses and online, and we're really trying to make sure that that is coupled with live virtual constructive training, where we are networking simulators both at the MAGTAF level and at the unit level, all the way down to squad simulators and aviators in flight simulators, all in the same system, all being able to see what each other are doing and essentially fighting a battle or a campaign in the virtual space without us having to do it and expend fuel, expend time and energy getting people to certain places and training areas, and perhaps more importantly, or as importantly, not allowing our adversaries who are watching what we're doing to see what we're capable of doing. So that's going to be an investment that takes time, but it is something that the Commandant is certainly determined to put into effect. And we're still doing things at 29 Palms. For those that were worried that, you know, the new CAX, the maneuver warfare exercise was behind us, that is not in fact the case. We are doing live virtual force-on-force training out in the desert in all domains, and it is forcing us to think in ways that we did not have to do before. Because if you key the handset on a radio now, you can be located and you can be targeted. We didn't have to worry about that even 10 years ago. Now we have to worry about it. And if we want our Marines to not just fight but survive, we've got to be smart and we've got to outthink the enemy. And so I'll close it there. I think I've been going for a little while, and I'll open it up for questions. But we are well on our way to changing the Marine Corps in ways to make sure that we can counter the current threat of the People's Liberation Army, of the People's Republic of China. That is our pacing threat. But also Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremist organizations. And one thing I would tell you that our Commandant has admitted is that he did not emphasize enough early on in this force design discussion that we are still doing many of the things that we've done for decades in terms of crisis response and contingency response, with deploying Marine Expeditionary Units, Special Purpose MAGTAFs all over the world, and making sure that we remain the first to fight in our Expeditionary Force in readiness. So with that, I think I'll stop talking. And I do want to, however, reinforce a couple of things, because if you notice, I am in the recruiting uniform.
Yes, you are.
And this is what our recruiters wear. It's a short sleeve shirt in the summertime. But I want to tell you, if you're wondering what you can do for me, I'm going to tell you. You can reinforce the importance of serving one's country, and especially the opportunities that the military has to offer to every young person that you know. Now, not everybody can or wants to be a Marine, but we need to be talking about it. Reinforce with local, state, and federal departments of education the benefits of military service, the importance of ASVAB testing of all students, and the need for recruiter access to schools. And believe it or not, I was just up in Berkeley yesterday, in fact, didn't see you all, but I saw Sergeant Huerta, and I saw First Lieutenant Johnson, and it was a great environment, very different from what perhaps I expected. I really didn't know what to expect. When I was on recruiting duty the first time, my counterpart in San Francisco had a very different experience from me in Berkeley. And I would say everybody was very friendly. However, when the OSO's recruiting office moved into downtown Berkeley, that city passed a law that prohibited other recruiting services from moving in. And so now, fortunately, we're grandfathered, but we cannot move out of there and move to another location in the city limits, because that city has prohibited military recruiters from having an office there. Very short-sighted, but it's America and it's our democracy. So we need access. Push your elected officials and legislatures to reinstate civic education in the school system and incentivize physical fitness. The old Presidential Physical Fitness Awards, I remember doing that. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a spokesman at one point, and that was a big deal growing up. Not sure I've ever heard of that in the last 10 or 20 years. He is also, our commandants encourage senior military officials to speak to community influencers about the importance of military service. I do that as a part of my job. I consider this part of that, but I also speak to the Chamber of Commerce, to other community influencing organizations, because it is important. And of course, last and not least, if you know a young man or woman that should be a Marine, provide that name to a Marine Corps recruiter. They would love to talk to them. So with that, I'm done, and I'll open it up to questions. Thank you very much.
If you have a question, please fill out your question card and hand it to one of the staff, and we'll get it up to the general. We have time for about 3 or 4 questions.
Okay, sorry about that. I guess I went a little long. All right. Okay, I'm going to start with the, I wouldn't call this low-hanging fruit, the one on top. Who is the best NCO you ever knew?
John Bass.
That's a great question. And I would tell you that probably the best non-commissioned officer I ever knew was a sergeant that served with me in Afghanistan. He was my personal security detail officer in charge. And he ran a platoon's worth, 19 Marines and 3 or 4 vehicles for me over 6-7 months in Afghanistan. Got blown up a number of times, but did exactly what he was expected to do, and defended me really to the utmost of his ability, and did a magnificent job. I asked a lot of that sergeant. Most battalion commanders actually had lieutenants running the PSD, but I didn't have enough lieutenants, and I asked this young sergeant to do the job, and he brought everybody home alive from that deployment and made sure I was alive. Okay, what was something you really believed as a young officer that you turned out to be completely wrong about? Wow. That's a great question. I think probably this goes back to the recruiting bit. I think young officers and people that aren't familiar with the recruiting business expect that they will always have young men and women in their ranks that want to serve. And I assumed that young men and women would want to serve in the quantities that we could maintain our ranks. I would tell you that is not the case. For young leaders, it requires their active interest and mentorship of their Marines and sailors to make sure that not only are they developing professionally, but they understand what the benefits of serving a career in the military are. So I thought people just wanted to show up and serve and they would keep doing it. Boy, was I wrong. And the Marine Corps today has to really demonstrate that being a career Marine is not just a viable, but it is a rewarding and satisfying endeavor. Okay, how much FDC, Fire Direction Center, do you remember from your 81 millimeter mortar days? So I'm assuming somebody read my bio. I love the FDC and being a mortar platoon commander. I used to be a whiz on the plotting board, but I'll be honest with you, now I remember very little. And probably I know how to call for fire and how to do a call for fire, a basic triangular mission, but that's about it. So sorry to disappoint you. All right, next question. With the approval of tanks for the Ukraine and Germany now following, how close are we to boots on the ground in Ukraine? Wow. Great question that I don't have the answer to. And I don't want to delve into that, but I will say that having been to combat a number of times, served in the military almost 31 years now in commissioned service, we are probably closer to going to war with a nation state than at any time that I have been in the service. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. I pray to God it does not. Marines will be ready to go, but all it takes is a simple miscalculation in the South China Sea or on the border of Romania or Poland, and we have treaty obligations. And the U.S. military is going to do what our civilian masters tell us to do and what our nation has obligated us to do. So I am praying, and I hope you pray, that we don't do it. Our job as Marines is to be ready to go. And when we do engage in combat, to kick our adversaries' ass.
Great comment, Dana. At the end of the day, we're in the business of killing, fighting and winning the wars. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So, Jason, can't thank you enough. Jane Connell, thank you again for coming up here, and thank you for sharing those thoughts. Really do appreciate it. And again, for the young men and women there who have found that calling, my hat's off to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. He's going to hang around, any questions or anything, and the boss closed, but have a great night. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation from Marines Memorial Association and Foundation. To learn more about the organization and our programs, please visit our website at marinesmemorial.org.